we have two amazing speakers in a really elevated discussion on the subject of sustainability and the discussion of corporations' role within climate and climate action. And we know we're on the heels of Davos. It just happened a couple of weeks ago. It was really exciting for me to hear back that corporations are continuing to have this commitment and some of the ways in which they are doing so. So to start, let me introduce Scott Rank. Scott and I spent the afternoon together today talking about sustainability, which was a lot of fun. Scott doesn't look this age, but he has over 36 years of experience. Should I even say that? I always wonder if I should say decades of experience in consumer products, retailing, and management consulting. Most recently, he transformed the international expansion of Grupo Lala, which is really the standard, one of the largest dairy producers in Mexico. And he introduced ESG sustainability program, including reduction of water usage, launch of the first 100% certified organic line of milk products, and the first energy installation and conversion to get to 40% clean energy use at Grupo Lala. Prior to that, he was the president and CEO of Walmex, which is Walmart in Mexico and Latin America. And it's really fascinating to see what impact Walmart has had in many ways in the area of sustainability and at scale. So both of these companies that I mentioned are multi-billion-dollar companies. Walmart in particular, Walmex, had 234,000 employees, 49,000 suppliers, just to give you a sense of kind of the scale they can have in 648 cities. Some of the interesting things that they did that he'll speak about today is how they moved a lot of their suppliers to a sustainability index in their purchasing buying, and also how they looked at conservation in their stores and how they ran their stores for energy efficiency. He's going to be joined in conversation with Professor Magalis Dalmas, who I'm so thrilled to have here with us. Professor Dalmas is a management professor at UCLA Anderson and also with a cross-appointment at UCLA Institute of Environment and Sustainability. Her research areas lie in business strategy, corporate sustainability, social responsible investing. She's written more than 90 articles, book chapters, case studies on business and sustainability. She's also the director of UCLA Center for Corporate Environmental Performance. And from 2014 to 2017, she was the president of the Alliance for Research in Corporate Sustainability. So without further ado, I would like to invite in conversation both of our speakers up to the chairs that we have. I was going to say the stage, but the chairs that we have in front.
So, yes, we were very excited to have you here today because you are a trailblazer. So you started sustainability initiatives at a time where few companies were doing it, few CEOs were doing it. And so both at Walmart in Mexico and Grupo Lala. And the question I have to you is, how do you start these things? So can you just kind of walk us through some of these initiatives, first maybe at Walmart? How did you kind of start these things? How did that come about? And what were the initiatives that you were maybe the most proud of?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you all for being here. Let me just start also by saying I'm not an expert on sustainability. I've had the opportunity to promote and help develop and help implement sustainability programs in a couple of different companies. Some were successful, some weren't. But anyway, so I have experience on both sides of things that work and things that don't work. But I'm not an expert in sustainability like a lot of you are and like Professor Dalmas is. How do we get started in some of these things? I think maybe my first experience wasn't necessarily environmental sustainability. It was more of a social program for small schools, the Coca-Cola Company. I used to work out in Mexico. I was vice president of marketing for Coke Mexico when I was a little boy, I think, a very long time ago. And we had an opportunity, I saw a window of opportunity to help promote the Coca-Cola Foundation through a very small charge in the incidence that the Coca-Cola Company, of the concentrate cost they charge their bottlers. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of support for the company supporting the foundations at that time. And I saw the door open and jumped into it and came up with a very small little tiny charge that no one even noticed that let us triple the budget for this Coca-Cola Foundation in Mexico. And they went on to become one of the premier foundations for supporting indigenous schools across the country. So I think what got me started was when I saw an opportunity that was open, a door that was open, it was important for me to take advantage of that. And so Walmart was a company that, I think relatively early on compared to a lot of other large companies. I think 2005, 2006, as I recall. The Walton family, together with the CEO, Lee Scott at that time, were interested in really trying to make a difference in the environment and global warming, generally speaking. And so they launched an initiative where they invited their operations around the world, U.S. and the international operations as well, to go after a number of very aggressive objectives. Greenhouse gases, waste, water, a couple of just general core environmental objectives. And it was a big deal, and I think what really helped is they set the tone as to what we could start to do in the company. And at that time, I was Chief Operating Officer in Walmart Mexico. Walmart Mexico is a public company, but it's 70% owned by Walmart, and the rest is on the stock market in Mexico. And so we started working on a lot of different initiatives there. And we started with things that we thought were important. It sounded important. We did things like LED lighting in the stores, right? Very simple things to start with. But then you start getting more and more involved, and you start involving more and more people, and you start to find out there's a lot of other opportunities out there. So we had people that were experimenting with a lot of things. And we came up with some pretty interesting results. We were able to, in a 4-year, 5-year period, reduce absolute greenhouse gas emissions by about 29%, as I recall. The emissions per square meter, because this company was growing very, very quickly, were reduced 50% in the same 4 or 5-year period. Combination of savings, renewable energy implementation, and a lot of activities. But I guess that's a long answer because we're going to get into more questions. But I guess what I wanted to say is the first thing is I saw a door that was open, and we just kind of started to push and run down that path.
So I think you're too modest because you have experience. I mean, we teach and we research, but you have had the experience, the kind of hands-on experience of actually launching these initiatives. So when you start by saying now we want to have 40%, 50% of our energy from renewables, how do you go about it?
Well, I think the first thing I think is every country had to find the best opportunity for it. And one thing I learned, because we eventually bought Central America, so we were running Mexico and Central America, is that what worked in Mexico didn't work in Central America and vice versa sometimes. So there was an opportunity that the Mexican government gave a subsidy to renewable energy sources, solar, wind in particular, in the sense that and you guys know this official term, the transportation costs, the transmission costs, the load factor or pooling, what's it called? When you move energy from one part of the country to another part of the country? This is a question for the audience. Anyway,
I guess
anyway, that typically has a cost to it, and the Mexican government subsidized that and said you can generate, as long as it's renewable energy, you can generate in any part of the country you want, and you can take it to another part of the country, and the official government electric company would do that for you free of charge. Okay? So that opened up an interesting opportunity that a few companies, and in particular Walmart, kind of jumped onto. And so we very quickly got involved as co-investors and off-takers, long-term contracts with wind generation farms that were huge. And I think we very quickly got up to 500, 700 gigawatts of wind power in about 3 years.
So in terms of cost benefits, so this was kind of probably a big kind of investment ex ante. How did you make the decision at the company level?
It was relatively easy because the cost of the wind-generated power was actually lower than the cost of buying it off the grid from the electric company. What we had to do was make some long-term financial commitments, so we had to study very carefully how the pricing was set up. We had to make a lot of special installations in the stores that weren't too expensive. But that kind of got us started, and that was I think, so there was, again, we saw an opportunity, and so that's what helped with renewable energy. There was a government opportunity. They opened the window. And since then, that window is closed, but even today, it still makes sense to move to renewable energy in the case of Mexico. In the case of some of the Central American countries we also operated in, that was not the fact. So we had to find other things to do in those countries.
Like what, for example?
We tried solar. We tried, obviously, LED lighting. We did a lot of things to reduce energy consumption in the stores by closing refrigerating cases with lightweight plexiglass kind of doors. a lot of different small projects. And if you start to add them up, they give you a lot of savings.
So you make it easy. It looks like you just decided and just it happened, and that was easy. So why, are not more companies doing it? So were there some challenges, or?
Well, there were definitely a lot of challenges we ran into. I think the most important thing, based on my experience, Maggie, you need, in a large company, I think we implemented 4 things that you have to drive a sustainability agenda. One is you have to have the right culture. I'll talk about that in a sec. The second is you have to have goals, you have to have metrics, and you have to empower the people to be able to do what they need to do. The culture started with the Walton family and the global CEO, where he gave us the permission and gave us a mandate to go do what we could do. Then internally in Mexico, we are also very careful to let people make mistakes. We're also very important to make sure that we decentralized a lot of the decision-making on that. And then we also wanted to make sure it was incorporated into the business. It was never considered a PR program. It was part of the ongoing day-to-day business, which is very important. The second is you need a very aggressive goal. You need a goal that's aspirational, and you need a goal that's relevant to your business and to your market. And so some of the goals we set up initially in Mexico were relevant to Mexico, and they were a little bit different than the goals in Central America because you have to understand the economics of sustainability can vary country to country, market to market. So we set up some very aggressive goals, 100% renewables by 2025, for example, and I think they're going to hit that next year. So they'll hit that 2021, probably 3 or 4 years ahead of time. 100% zero waste in the stores, 2025. I think they'll hit that 2 years as well. And zero, 100% water utilization. So, zero taking water off the city water system. So some big, hairy goals that are out there that you have to make sure people understand what they are. They have to be relevant to your local market. And then metrics. Metrics are real important. You have to take those big goals and bring them down to kind of annual operating metrics. And these are metrics you're going to put in to your monthly or quarterly management routines. And so you need metrics that are very relevant to your business as well, and those are important to implement those. And then finally, empower the people. You can't, in our case, I think what really worked is we didn't have a department that was responsible for sustainability. The CFO was responsible for it, the head of operations was responsible for it, the merchants were responsible for it, the marketing team was responsible. And sure, we had a central team that was doing a lot of measurement and reporting, but you made sure that the entire organization was responsible. You empowered them, you let them make mistakes, and you encouraged a lot of very small projects to get up and started. So those 4 elements I think are important. The culture, the goals, the metrics, and empowering the team to make sure you can do this.
So you're talking about mistakes. So what happened when people actually made mistakes?
Sometimes, ideally the mistakes were made at the testing phase and not the rollout phase. So we tested a lot of things regarding water recycling. And we found out that, and we installed in 5 or 6 or 7 pilot stores, a lot of recycling systems, very small kind of mini recycling systems that would recycle the water and prepare it to be put into the lawn or go through the bathrooms and things like that, or to wash the parking lot or whatever. And we found out that there were local laws that say you couldn't put water on grass in the yard or somewhere in your yard unless it was drinkable, 100%. It had to be potable, you'd say, I think, drinkable water in certain states in Mexico. And so, so we either had to go back and convince people to change legislation, or we had to just use the water differently. And so we ended up using it differently, and we ended up putting a lot of very, very nearly perfect clean water back into the sewer system because there was no other option to that. But when we learn things like that, you say, well, gee, unfortunately, in those states, we'll do one level of purity in the water. In other states where you can use more of it, we'll do another level of purity in the water. So there were things like that you just learned, but ideally in the testing phase, not in the rollout.
But so that was okay. You would just let people.
Some of it we just let it. If it was something that was going to be so hard to change, we go on to the next project. I'd like to be able to say, sure, we went out and changed the legislation across a lot of states, but we didn't.
What a great CEO
we didn't go
to
that.
work
We didn't go that far.
What a great CEO to work for. You can do mistakes. It's okay. Everything is fine, right? So, it looks like it.
We had to get results as well.
You had to get results.
The sustainability results, because that's important too. This wasn't like an optional project. It was you had to get sales, you had to generate profits, and you also had to meet your sustainability goals as well. So we were, I think, equally demanding across all of those sorts of metrics in the business. I mean, my own personal evaluation, for example, 15% of my annual evaluation was based on sustainability results. And my evaluations, my direct reports, their direct reports, et cetera, and everything cascaded down.
So that's quite incredible, actually, 50%. So just 15%.
Yeah.
So even then, actually. So I have kind of one question about the relationship with Walmart corporate headquarters. Right. Did they help you? How does that work with in such a big corporation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they helped us by giving us the mandate and then giving us freedom and flexibility to experiment. Right. That was tremendous help. In other places, I haven't had that much help, and so it helps when you have that kind of mandate out there. The second is they also gave us some frameworks. One was the packaging scorecard index, where we evaluated, first of all of our own packaging for all of our private label to try to make all that packaging more sustainable. And then kind of once we had a good feeling for that, we started to take it out to our suppliers as well. And then there was also a supplier sustainability index that we also started to take out to more and more suppliers over time. That's complex because what's a good decision in sustainability for one industry, like agriculture-related products, is not necessarily as the right index, the right metrics for someone that's making television sets. And so what's a little tricky there is when you do try to come up with a single index that covers a giant range of industries that your suppliers represent. So that one was tough to implement. But we did get some tools like that then helped us get more involved with people up and down our supply chain.
Okay. So some might say that Walmart at one point was criticized for, kind of the way, the employees were treated, and that sustainability was a way to kind of not cover, but, kind of move in a certain direction. And so what's your take on the link between sustainability, the environmental and the social side?
Yeah. I think when we started, in our case in particular, New Mexico was focused really on the environmental side of things. The social aspects of sustainability we're also gradually implementing over time. I don't think, and I think there's a case, some mention of this, my understanding is the decision to get into a very aggressive environmental sustainability program worldwide was not based on trying to cover something else up. It was because the Walton family and the CEO at that time and the CEOs after him believed in it, in the program. So let me just put that on the record. And I don't work for Walmart anymore, but I just want to mention that. So they really believed in that. The social sustainability programs, making sure that your employees are treated properly is something that I think just goes back to good business. I mean, successful businesses have commitment. You have commitment to the employees, to the company, and the company to the employees. And it's a two-way street. And so a lot of things you do over time to make sure that you are committed to your employees. And if you do that, you're going to get a good return on any investment you make there because they're going to be more loyal, you'll have lower rotation, you'll be able to promote from within, you'll be able to attract talent, etc. So, over time, there are a lot of gradual improvements to employees' packages, working conditions, training, lots of things over time that I experienced. And we every single year had the lowest turnover in the entire industry, every single year. And they still do today in Mexico, Central America. And I'm sure the U.S. does as well. But so we never saw the environmental program as something that was substituting something else we weren't doing. Just be careful.
So you see they're connected and they can actually help each other.
Well, I think that's part of a good business system is you have social responsibility which is very broad these days, and lots of different programs you can have. And all the pieces interact, and they have to come together to make sense for your internal constituents and for your public. And so they all come together and they interact. And so, whether it's, there's some new laws, for example, just passed in Mexico that are interesting about making sure there's no psychological stress placed on employees in the work environment. Mm-hmm. Brand new. So a lot of companies are now kind of wrestling with that. What does that mean, and how do you avoid that? Mm-hmm. So it has to do with standards you put in place, work environment, how you treat teams that aren't reaching their goals. It's complex, but it's new. And that's going to be interesting because I think a lot of companies are going to have to learn, now, what does that mean, and how do you avoid psychological tension and stress for your employees in such a way that you still generate results, of course, but you're doing it in a way that's not causing any problems for them and their family.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very interesting. So moving to a little bit of your experience with Grupo Lala. Yeah. So there you had one line that went fully organic. The market that, as we had discussed a bit before, market that wasn't really so receptive at the beginning to green products. So how do you do this, and how do you get consumers to be buying green products?
Right. That was a tough project. It was something that the market in Mexico, when we did this was only 3 years ago. The market in the U.S. for organic milk is very large. It's huge. In Mexico, it's still relatively small. In Brazil, it's non-existent. In other countries, we took a look at as part of our operation. And we decided to do it in Mexico first. There was a small company doing some organic milk, and we wanted to try to double or triple the size of the segment. And so, we launched the project. It was not easy because in this case, the company I worked with, Lala, they process the milk and make finished product. They don't have any cows or manage the farms. So the first challenge was to convince a farmer, a dairy farmer, to invest in a very, very, very small niche of the milk market. And for that farmer, it's a big upfront cost because the land has to be prepared, and it takes almost 2 years to do that. You have to bring seeds in that'll grow the grasses that those cows are going to eat. You have to import the cows that are certified cows that you're going to then inseminate with certified sperm, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very complex process, a very high upfront cost. And it took us a while to find a farmer that was going to do that. We did find one who was going to do it, and he did it. And so we had to then go down and certify our plants and our distribution systems and everything else across the whole supply chain. We launched a product. We gained immediately about a third of the market, and the market also grew about another 40-50%. The market's been growing and growing today. Today it's probably twice the size of it was 3 years ago when it was launched. But it hasn't been easy for that farmer who started because the scale at which he did this organic project was not 4 or 5 cows. I mean, he was really interested in supporting it as well. And so he had much more capacity than what we could be consuming. So it was difficult, and you had to do things like compensate him in buying his extra milk. And even though we didn't put organic on the label, there was a lot of organic milk in the market that was not labeled organic. And then finally, he started selling to Nestlé and others that were also looking for organic products. So I think he made the right decision, but it was tough because the immediate economic benefits weren't there, but he's someone who believed in what we were trying to do, and he had the patience, I think, to wait for it to start to pay back for him. I think it is today.
So in some ways, you subsidized this investment initially.
Yes. Yeah, initially, yes.
So how was it to, moving from Walmart to Grupo Lala in terms of the type of infrastructure and support that you would have to kind of launch this type of initiative?
Yeah, there was, not as much. So a lot of it we had to start from scratch. It's a company that's done a lot of the right things for many, many years. They took away the growth hormones that a lot of even U.S. farmers still use in dairy cows 10 years ago. So they made a lot of right decisions over time. It was a company that wanted to make the right decisions. But you had to go out and have some seed funding for projects that were important. So we did some seed funding for some solar. We did seed funding for a revamp on technology and all the water treatment plants across 30-something plants in the system. And so we did have to do some special capital allocations and things like that to get it started. I think it's important that you sometimes you do have to do special decisions on CapEx and things like that. But it's seed money, and think of it as venture capital within your own company, to a sense. And if you get that started and people start to see results, people start to get excited about it. And as the people start to get excited about it, they jump on board. And that's what we had to start to do in that company, because there was a lot of things that they've been doing recently to become world-class in the dairy industry, related to environmental sustainability, things of that nature. And I think they're there now, and it's stuck. It's there. It's going to continue. So that's what's exciting to see.
So to go back to the consumer side, so in Walmart and both, the product of Walmart and Grupo Lala, the consumer initially was not really about sustainability. So how do you move them? How do you move the needle as a company?
Yeah, in Latin American markets, you don't have as much consumer demand for sustainable products as you do in the U.S. or Europe, clearly. And so the consumer side of it is more complex. If you just slap a green label on the product, it doesn't sell. We tried initially in Walmart, I think about 350 SKUs that were organic. And the prices were between 20 and 70 or 80% higher. And just throwing the organic label on an apple that looks smaller and more ugly and taste almost the same, and charging 40% more for it didn't work initially, right? So we had to go through, and there were about 25 or 30% that did work, and so those you had to support. And so we would constantly put them on display. We would absorb the cost of the shrink or the product that was wasted. We would kind of handheld the suppliers for a while to keep it going. And eventually you found the right catalog of products that consumers were accepting, and eventually that starts to grow. The organic milk, same thing. It was a small part of the volume, but it did start to grow the category. The fact that Lala was far and away the number one producer in the market, got into the category, that by itself starts to grow the category. And so it takes a while. Consumers are more complex. Consumers are complex animals, I'm sorry, is what I say. So you have to give them more than just an organic label. You have to give them some other benefits, obviously, to make them interested in buying your products, especially if you want to charge more, which in emerging markets is not easy. Not an easy thing to do. So I think that's one of the areas that we were not as successful as we probably were on our own internal operations and supply chain initiatives and things like that.
No, I completely agree. That's what I've been advocating in my book, if you're interested, about how to get consumers to be more interested in green products. And so I think here we have kind of these two different experiences. And I wanted to ask you about kind of your own take on what are, according to you, kind of the main sustainability challenges that businesses face these days, and how to best address them from a business perspective.
Well, I think one of the social corporate responsibility has been broadening in scope at a very fast pace. And there are a lot of areas to be focused on these days, and that in itself is the challenge, I think, to some degree. I think it's tough for a company that's initiating a lot of sustainability activities to try to go after 20 or 30 at the same time. And I think one thing that has helped the companies I've worked at get started is to be a little more focused on some things. But it's tough to do, because in your GRI, your Global Reporting Initiative reports, et cetera, and all that, you'll see, well, they're doing okay on these 4 or 5 things, but they're not doing well on these other 20, 24 things that are being reported. So it's a challenge. But I think, so one of the challenges I think people face is just it's gotten so broad, which again I think is good. And I think that the public and investors and consumers in general have to be a little bit forgiving of a company that's maybe not good at doing 30 or 40 different initiatives. And maybe they're good at doing 5 or 6 or 7. And as long as those 5 or 6 or 7 are relevant to their industry, to the country they're operating in, to the local markets, et cetera, I think it's important we give them a little bit of slack and credit for that, so that they keep investing in it. I mean, because the objective is that eventually, if they're not doing something for palm oil today, right, that they'll get to palm oil, but maybe palm oil is not one of the most relevant subjects for that industry or for that particular country per se. So that's, I think, a big challenge. that a lot of companies are facing is that where do you start? Because there are so many fronts you can go against.
And where do you stop?
Excuse me?
And where do you stop? Where do you start and where do you stop? So
Yeah.
what's kind of like, kind of the number of initiatives that you want to launch and how much information you disclose, I guess, to the public?
Yeah.
I know a lot of companies do things and don't want to talk about it because they are afraid that people are going to say, well, it's not enough. So they say, okay, it's better I'm just going to not disclose until I'm really sure that what I'm doing is going to be accepted. So on a more personal note, so I know you are starting a new venture, and I'd love to hear about it. And so how do you kind of, what is this new venture about, and what about sustainability kind of, in the future for you?
Right. Well, I'm starting in an investment vehicle called a SPAC, Special Purpose Acquisition Company, that'll be focused on the North American consumer, and I'll be investing in either retail or consumer products, the two industries I know, with co-investors that are actually, or public investors, because it's a vehicle that you raise on the public markets. And it'll be kind of a mid-sized company. Now, and Maggie asked me, well, will you be investing in a company that is sustainable, that has made a lot of progress in sustainability? And I said, that's not the first focus, because it's tough to find, necessarily, the right company to invest in that meets a whole bunch of sustainability criteria. But what I know will happen is I know we'll take the sustainability agenda and apply it to that company or to that investment we'll be making. Because there's still so many companies that have the opportunity to have a big impact on the environment or on social sustainability issues that are not doing it today that could be doing it. And they can be doing it and saving money in the process. They can do it and they can grow their sales in the process. They can be doing it and growing and reinforcing their corporate culture as they do it as well. And they're just not, and they should be, and they can be.
Great. And maybe we can help you here at UCLA in helping you with metrics on how to measure, this impact. We'd be love to do that. Well, so thank you so much for this this conversation. We're going to open now up for questions. And so please, if you have a question, raise your hand. We have a microphone that will come around. Please keep your question to a question.
Thank you for being here. So I'm not a sustainability expert either. So when you're talking about 0% waste, what does that mean exactly when Walmart is producing 0% waste? Does that mean the cardboard boxes even that the suppliers are shipping in, everything that they're getting reused?
Yeah, everything. So that has to do with your entire operation. So everything that you're receiving is reused or converted into something else or recycled. So that has to do with what's coming through your supply chain, what you're generating in your offices in terms of waste. And it does not include, based on the current definition of the goal, what happens the consumers do with what you sold them, for example. But it has to do with your own internal operation. Okay? Thanks. So that would be kind of a definition of zero waste as it was originally established a number of years ago by Walmart in Mexico.
Fascinating topic, and we know there's a little bit of a debate going on right now about climate change, and everybody knows it's a hoax, except people who look at the data. So I'm wondering if on corporate boards, is there a debate about sustainability in business and whether or not it's good for the bottom line, or is it pretty clear that maybe if you're not in the oil and gas or coal industry, it is a profitable practice, or maybe that's being debated today still?
Yeah, the impression I get is that, through my own experience, that it's a good investment for your company, sustainability. A lot of what we did over the years, both Walmart, Lala, and things like both companies, resulted in lower costs or resulted in higher sales or resulted in lower inventories, things like that. So there's a lot of things I think sustainability doesn't mean you're going to earn less profits. And I think there's kind of an assumption out there that sustainable activities mean you are automatically going to earn less profits, and that's not the case. I don't believe that. There are initiatives that do require seed money, that required some investment up front, et cetera, but they should have a return on them. And I think they can have a return. So my experience is that. I think a lot of the boards, and I'm not a board jockey, so I'm not sitting on a lot of boards, but I know a lot of businessmen and a lot of board members. And I don't hear people that don't believe in sustainability today. I think people get it, generally speaking. I think there's a lot less resistance at the board level, for example, than maybe there was 10 years ago, because they start to see the reality of that it does work, it can work, and I also think they start to see the reality of, gee, things are getting a little more dangerous in terms of what's happening with the environment.
Hi, my name is Clarissa, and I'm a second-year student at Anderson. Thank you so much for coming here. So you mentioned that there's like a lot of initiative that you incorporate into like a big corporation such as like Walmart. So I was kind of just curious, are those initiatives most likely like from like bottom up, or is it top down kind of initiative? And then how do you get people to buy in, like either way, like either type of initiative? Like how do you get people to get excited? Because from what I heard, that you need to get every level of the company to be involved to have the initiative be successful.
Right. Well, I think a lot of what we were successful with a lot of it was bottom up, although there was also some very good top-down initiatives. So it's, I don't know what it is, 60-40, 50-50, but it comes both ways. And the bottom-up initiatives, what's really important, as I mentioned, was having the mandate, setting the tone at the top of the company, making sure there's a goal out there, and then empowering people to go find the solutions in their area of responsibility that work. So, we started hearing lots and lots of ideas and things that came up, and a lot of things that worked, some that didn't. So people wanted to reutilize the cooking oil that made the French fries and sort of et cetera like that. You can do a little of that, but we found out that on a large scale, we couldn't find a good way of really doing that across all the stores. It was okay for a few stores. But then others found some people in the construction department, urinals for the men's bathrooms that didn't use water. And this was like 10 years or 15 years ago, and they found some technology in Israel, as I recall, that where you just had a little valve and you didn't have to have any water in the urinals, and they worked. And so that was one where someone had the idea, someone found the supplier, we tested it, it worked, and we rolled it out across the stores, and then we started seeing them all over the country. And so they're in the airports and here and there and everywhere else. And that was bottom up. No one gave us that idea from headquarters. But there were also some good things that came from headquarters as well. There was a personal, I think they still have that sustainability initiative, which encouraged all of the employees in the company to do something in their own home, in their own lives that was good for the environment, just to start to get them involved in sustainability, to help them start to understand it and help them start to reflect it in their lifestyles. So I think it can come both ways. I think it's important that it comes sometimes both ways, top down as well as bottom up. And when it is bottom up, make sure the people feel ownership on those projects. Let them fail, let them try things that don't work, but also make sure they're trying things and make sure they're fixing them if they can be fixed and make sure that they're scaled. For me, what's very frustrating are companies that are doing PR projects and not really trying to scale their initiatives. And there's nothing, it's not, sustainability is not a PR program. If there's something that you can't make part of your business and it's sustainability related, give it to your foundation. Because all companies have a charitable foundation. So charitable foundations, I think, have an important role sometimes in supporting, through money or other things, very good causes. But if that cause can't be sustainability, I see very different than things that are in foundations, because it's got to be part of the day-to-day business. So when I'm saying then the solution, a lot of it's bottom up, it's because everybody in your business should be looking for options and opportunities you have to drive sustainability. Okay?
Hi, Scott. My name is Liza, and I had a quick question about the suppliers of Walmart and the potential, the potential effect that a huge behemoth like Walmart could have if they said, not only are we going to be zero waste, but we also demand that the suppliers that supply us have extremely stringent sustainability practices so that they reduce single-use plastics or increase biodegradability. Like, what are your thoughts on not just your own company's practices, but demanding that from suppliers as well?
Yeah, Walmart launched a supplier scorecard, to encourage the suppliers to be measuring their own environmental impact of their operations and to be taking initiatives on improving that situation. But at the same time, I think the company was and is still careful not to demand it and not to say, you can only sell me if you're doing this, that, or some other thing. I think it's, my experience, it was always better if you were collaborating with suppliers and not pressuring them. So we actually did some sustainability fairs where we brought our suppliers together and shared in a public open event, totally open to the public, as I recall, our sustainability initiatives, and they shared their sustainability initiatives as well. And so you started to get them involved in the whole subject. And I think that works well as well. So yeah, there are Walmarts used to be, and I think they still are actively helping suppliers to measure those that don't have their own formal measurements on their environmental sustainability. But I'm not sure that they're demanding anybody comply with certain things. As far as I know, I no longer work with the company, right?
I'm Brian. I'm a second year here at Anderson and the president of our Impact Investing Fund. And one of the things that we are trying to do this year is think about metrics and which metrics matter the most to us. So you just talked about the index scorecard, and I'm wondering if certain metrics within that scorecard get kind of higher scores or are weighted more heavily, and what that process of coming up with the scorecard was like.
I wasn't on the development end of that one. I was on the receiving end of that one, being out in a subsidiary of the company. So I can't tell you, how it was developed per se, but I do know that it was evolving over time because, as I think I mentioned, it's a tough thing to do an environmental scorecard across so many different industries. And there are things in common that you come to a greenhouse gas and you measure that for everybody, right? And waste and how much of your energy is renewable, et cetera. So there are standards, but there are a lot of things that are industry specific. So I think, it evolved over time. It's complex. It's not easy to do that because it's so broad, the different sorts of things you have to go after. But it was helpful because, again, it got suppliers and still has suppliers interested in trying to meet a standard.
I think in terms of the history of that, there was a lot of help from NGOs and a lot of stakeholders. So yeah, I think that's also kind of a point, that's
I didn't mention that, yeah.
About the role of others, outside of the company. How did they help you kind of bring this, these initiatives?
Yeah, NGOs were very useful. NGOs, first of all, they bring issues to the table for you that maybe you didn't have on your radar that you need to know about. They also are very knowledgeable, so they can very quickly bring you up to speed on not only what the issue is, but what potential solutions are. And then NGOs can also be a platform for massive change. One of the last projects I was working on at Grupo Lala Dairy Company was on food waste. And dairy is a fresh product, generally speaking, so it actually is one of the largest contributors to food waste in the world. And so we were working with the Consumer Goods Forum on how to start to combat food waste, and we were taking the lead on that initiative. And that's the kind of example of that's a group that has to do with retailers working together with their consumer goods suppliers. And that gives you a platform for massive implementation and change. So NGOs, have a key role. I think, they bring things to the table, they give you knowledge and bring you up to speed quickly on potential solutions, and then they can also be a platform for implementing change as well. So that's really important.
Do we have time for one last question?
Hello, my name is Pradnya, and I'm a second-year EMBA student. Recently in Davos, Coca-Cola came out and said they weren't going to give up using single plastic bottles because they said that's what consumers wanted. And it would make you think that they're putting the environmental responsibility back on consumers or in the guild. But you said that you guys came up with your environmental responsibilities regardless of the consumer. What do you think consumers should be doing then if they really want to see impact and they're also being blamed for some of the choices corporations are making?
Yeah, I think consumers, you know, they vote with their dollars a lot, and you see it, and we see it more and more. So one thing is, I think the consumers that are concerned about what a company is potentially doing or not doing are going to be voting with their dollars over time and how they spend their money. You know, consumers are very driven by a lot of different things, but and so you've got to, like I said, they're complex animals, and sometimes they'll do a lot of things that on one hand they're being very environmentally conscious when they're doing it, but on the other hand they're doing something the same day where they have no idea how what they're doing, how it may be affecting the environment. Let me give one example, which is e-commerce. One of the things that concerns me the most about the environment is the impact e-commerce is having on the environment. And I think there's more studies on this needed. I'm not an expert on it. Let me just keep saying that. I'm not an expert. But I do know a little bit about logistics economics, drop size economics. And when you know, how the bigger the drop, the bigger the bundle of number of packages delivered to a single location, it's more efficient from a CO, carbon dioxide point of view to maintenance, to labor, everything else. It's much more efficient the bigger the drop is. And that's whether the consumer is going out and buying it or someone's driving it to the home. So things like, and when you take a schedule and make it same-day delivery or next-day delivery, what used to be maybe a big drop size because it was a big shopping trip or a trip where you went to 2 or 3 locations and put a lot of different stuff in your bag or your car or whatever, is becoming a single drop, right? And not as a single drop, but you can't plan it a week ahead. You have to do it tomorrow, right? Tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, by the way. And so the logistics, the economics of logistics and the carbon footprint of logistics of same-day delivery, deliver it whatever time you want it, are huge. And I don't think those are being measured well. The other thing is free delivery. So what happens with free delivery? We start ordering single items. You know, because if it were not free and you had to have a minimum order of $30 or something or whatever it is, you'd be ordering bundles of items. Mm-hmm. And so those two tendencies we have right now as consumers, and we love it. We love e-commerce. I love e-commerce. We all love it, right? The convenience of it is phenomenal, but I think there's a lot of risk as what's happening to the environment with same-day delivery and free delivery that we need to think about and understand more. So we may stop buying. You gave the example of Coca-Cola because they're not recycling 100%, they're still using plastic bottles, but the same day we may be ordering free delivery one or two items that we should have actually thought about how we can bundle. So
right.
It's
the environmental impact of convenience is one of our main problems, right? So yeah. I agree, it's so important. So thank you so much, Scott, for these conversations. We're really so happy to have you here, and so just please join me in thanking you.